Welcome to Research Renaissance, presented by the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Embark on a journey into the forefront of cutting-edge brain science as we feature insightful discussions with a diverse array of guests, from early career researchers pioneering groundbreaking science to influential voices in investment communities, policymaking, and research institutions. Together, we delve into neurological diseases, their causes, treatments, and the quest for cures. Join us in advancing our understanding of the brain and addressing its ailments. Welcome to Research Renaissance. I'm Deborah Westphal, your host and guide through the fascinating future of the brain. Joining me today is Afreen Allam, CEO and founder of SiNON Nano Sciences. Afreen is also a 2023 Termeer Fellow. We will be discussing her journey from business school to startup CEO and her hopes for the future of SiNON. So let's dive in. Welcome, Afreen.
Thank you, Deb, for having me here today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You and I met just recently, and we had a great conversation. And what you're doing is really fascinating, and I'm excited to talk about it today. So let's just start with what is SiNON Nano Sciences, and what was kind of the inspiration?
So at SiNON, we mostly focus on target drug delivery for neurological diseases. And so the goal is creating a platform for any neurological disease, whether it's a brain tumor, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or even ADHD. The real challenge is 98% of medications needed to treat these neurological diseases cannot cross through the blood-brain barrier, which is our body's natural defense mechanism to keep everything out of the brain, which is great when we're healthy. But when a patient has a neurological disease disorder, we need medications to actually get there to do its job. That's where SiNON kind of comes in. We created a carbon-based nanoparticle that can shuttle medications across this blood-brain barrier using a Trojan horse mechanism, which bypasses the barrier without being recognized by the immune system as a foreign particle. So toxicity is extremely low, and safety is pretty high up there in terms of how can we use this for different applications.
So this is very new. Why haven't we figured this out before? What was it that was kind of unique in what you're doing, and for right now?
So I'm definitely not the first person to tackle this problem. It's been a challenge for decades now, and there's a lot of competing technologies that work with metal-based components or viral delivery mechanisms, or even using external factors like ultrasounds to temporarily open up the blood-brain barrier. So looking at what's currently in the market, we did a competitive landscape. We looked at what are their limitations and drawbacks, and how can we potentially overcome them. So first thing was, when you're looking at anything metal component related, whether it's gold, cadmium, selenium, any of those items, the challenge is it can eventually lead to liver failure or kidney failure. With moving into a molecule or using a delivery mechanism that was purely carbon-based, significantly boosts kind of the safety aspect, because our bodies naturally have carbon presence. So that's one way the immune system's not going to recognize it and not fight back as, oh, this is a foreign particle, let it get in. And the other area of, things like external forces like ultrasound or something that temporarily, or even surgery that requires you to disrupt the blood-brain barrier, even if it disrupts it for 30 minutes to an hour at a time, that window is too long for, potentially toxin materials to get in or get across when they're not supposed to. So when you need to cross through the blood-brain barrier, there's two properties you really need to have. One is the water solubility, so making it hydrophilic. The second is being able to pass the lipid membrane, so lipophilic. And the term they use is amphiphilic in nature, so meaning it can do both properties. And a lot of drugs can do one or the other, not both. Our nanoparticle has the capability to have this amphiphilic nature. And so that's what allows it to essentially passively diffuse through the blood-brain barrier without using any receptors or without using any external force. And by doing so, it makes it extremely biofriendly. And our whole goal was focused around, or the mission of the company is quality of life for patients. Like, you want to make them, feel better, but you also don't want them strapped to a hospital bed for the next 6 months. And, traditionally we've seen with chemotherapy how significant the side effects or the toxicity aspects are. And we wanted to move away from those challenges to make it more friendly for patients, but really, how do you extend their quality of life while receiving treatment?
So can you give me kind of describe a visual of what this mechanism is? Is it hooked to another delivery system, or what does it look like?
So I guess an analogy you could use is like a Russian doll. As you open it up, it gets smaller and smaller. Similarly, a carbon nanoparticle has multiple layers. And as you go to the inner core, it gets smaller. And so that's where you can insert basically small molecules, large biologics, anything that is kind of more on the therapeutic space. And the nanocarrier essentially is like a protective layer that will shuttle it across the blood-brain barrier without it, being exposed to external enzymatic reactions or through like any biological system.
So your journey, you kind of go back in time, and why this focus? I think you, if I remember, you said that you were thinking about medical school, and kind of talk about that and talk about the journey and how did you get to business school?
So it was a long, windy road, not very straightforward. And I grew up in a very typical Asian household where, at a young age, it's ingrained in you that medical school is the only option you have. So figure out how you're going to get there. So basically, I think the first year I was starting undergrad, a lot of people that were applying to med school just picked bio or chemistry as their majors. And I was like, I want to stand a little bit outside the box. So let's pick two majors, biochemistry and microbiology, which was very challenging at the time. But I think it gave me a good, scope of both areas. Like I was able to dive in a little bit deeper. And at the same time, I started volunteering at the Duke Cancer Center. And basically 2 weeks in, I thought I was going to quit because it was so challenging to watch patients go through chemotherapy, have their lives severely impacted because of the medications they were given, not necessarily their diagnosis. And since this was at Duke, there was patients that came in from all across the country, and many times they came in with no family. So, my job as a support, advocate was just be there for them. Whether they want to talk about diagnosis or if they want to talk about the weather, like it was totally up to them. And it gave me a way to kind of break the barrier in terms of understanding the pain points that they were going through and understanding why there needs to be a better alternative, because I saw what the traditional medication was doing. And I saw how painful it was in terms of like the side effects of chemo. And, 1 week I'd go in and the patient was completely fine. The following week, they looked like they were fighting against death, essentially, to stay alive for the next couple of days or whatnot. But it was like a cycle that just continued, and a cycle that didn't seem like, I felt like with modern medicine, how is this still possible? And how are we pumping in such high doses of toxins, hoping that it gets to the right target site? But in the long run, so much other damage is done. The immune system's gone. Patients are prone to simple infections or even a simple flu for you and I, within a couple of days we'll recover and we'll be fine. But for a cancer patient, that can be very deathly. And it's scary to think about that, of how, common infections can be so dangerous for patients that are immunocompromised or going through treatments such as chemotherapy.
There was a story that you shared with me that I thought was very touching about a particular lady that you would go in and see. Do you mind sharing that? Because I was very touched, and I think it drives you even now.
So I remember I walked in the first, week to go see her, and she looked at the way I was dressed, and I'm Muslim. I wear a headscarf, and she saw me, and right away she was like, "I don't want to talk to you." And I politely said, "It's completely fine," and I went to the next patient. The week after, I said, "Let me try again," and I got the same response. By the third week, she was a little curious. She was like, "What can I help you with?" And I was like, I'm here to help you, and whatever you want to talk about, like if there's any books I can get for you, or if you want to play a game, talk about the weather, whatever it is, like I'm just here to spend some time to kind of just be there as a support system. And she seemed hesitant, but she invited me in, and we started talking, and she was like, "What are you doing here?" And I told her I was a student, and she was like, "What are you studying?" And I told her microbiology, biochemistry. And the first response she had was, "Oh, what are you going to do with that? Make bombs?" And I laughed because I honestly thought she was joking. And the reality is, that was a very serious question for her. And when I realized that, I stopped laughing and I was like, "Oh, I'm actually a pre-med student. I'm looking to apply to medical school, and, I'm in the process of taking my prerequisites for that. At the time, prepping for MCAT and all the fun stuff." And her tone kind of changed. And she was like, "Oh, you're not like those people I see on TV." And it was one of those moments that I was like, it's unfortunate, but it happens. And I took it as an opportunity to kind of show her that, hey, we're just normal people. We're just, trying to, I guess, live a life like everyone else, and help others. And I think that was my motivating factor for going into medicine, because I loved the patient aspect. I love feeling like I could potentially make a difference. And that's when her tone completely changed, and I went to visit her weekly, and it just became kind of a routine for us. And she was there for almost 6 months at a time, because I think she was going through a bone marrow transplant. So it's a much longer process that you have to be hospitalized for. And you're also a lot more immunocompromised, so you can't leave. And it gave me the opportunity to really form a bond with her, but got to understand the pain points of, she talked through all the challenges she had faced with, different treatments she had received, different chemo cycles, different cocktails, and all of that. And I think from my point of view, it was, I guess, when a physician went in, they had a set limit of time, like it'd be 5 to 10 minutes maximum. Then they have to move on to the next patient. But with me, like I didn't have a time limit. I was like, however long you need, I'll sit here and I'll listen. And if there's anything I can do, I'll definitely try to help. But that was my time that I got to really understand the patient's perspective. And I think to this day, it keeps me going, because I remember those stories and I remember the hardships. And I feel like, especially in the oncology field, it's something that not just impacts the patient, but the family members, the caretakers, all the loved ones, because it impacts everyone around you.
Yeah, and your patience and just your love for these people gave you a real opportunity and a gift from this lady to have that understanding. I think it's a wonderful story. So you left medical school and decided to go into business. Why, and what was the decision-making process there?
So I actually never ended up going to med school. As the semester before graduating from undergrad, I was already in the process of, filling out the applications, had taken the MCAT, done everything. And I had started filling out some of the secondary applications when I realized I love the field of medicine, but I felt potentially research could make a bigger impact, where you can help hundreds of patients at once versus individually one at a time. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but I had to go have the difficult conversation with my parents. And initially, they were not too happy about it, but they did come around. I told them in the meantime, I'm not sure what my path forward is going to be, but I'll figure it out. In the meantime, we had already, applied. I had done a study abroad. I had started doing, some of this research work on carbon nanotubes, which is a little bit different from where we are today. But we had filed a patent, and it takes several years for that to get processed. So that was still kind of going on in the background. And then I realized I have a very technical background in terms of the science. But if eventually I want to take this and, make it into a business, I have no business background. And that's what kind of motivated me to apply for business school. And, when I was looking, Duke was always my dream school. And I think it started from me working in the hospital there. And so when I was applying, that was the only school I applied to. And my parents were like, you need a backup option. And for me, it was like, it's a huge time commitment, huge financial commitment. And if it wasn't a place where I felt like was the perfect fit, I didn't want to waste my time, or I didn't think it'd be, fair to spend that kind of money, because business school is expensive. And what kind of drew me to Duke was also the business school was very, like, their slogan was Team Fuqua. Everything was very team oriented. And you could see that from the students, from the professors. Everyone kind of was in it to help each other succeed. And I was fortunate to get in the first time around. When I started the program, it was life-changing because it was, I was in a field where it was very technical. And because I was a pre-med student, I basically lived in the book stacks, had no social life. And business school is very much the opposite. Like, you have to get out there and socialize, and you have to get out and network. And that was something that going into business school, I knew that I had to do, and I had to change about myself. Because I think I was, even now, I still consider myself an introvert, but I had to force myself outside of that bubble and go out there. And I joined programs like the Duke Startup Challenge, which was a year long. It was kind of like a startup competition. And, that was one of those things that I did it because I needed to have certain deadlines to have a pitch deck and a business plan and, things that you need to have in a business, but don't necessarily have the time to focus and get it done. But having a set deadline forces you to do so. And before applying, the feedback I got was, hey, you're a biotech company, you're not going to win. And I was like, that's fine. For me, the motivating factor is I need to get this material ready. And this is a great way to force me to get that done. So I applied anyways. And, I think we started off with close to 250 companies. And it's all across Duke, from the undergrad campuses to the engineering school to the business school. And we made it to the top 10 finals. And I remember that day sitting in the audience, the VC that was writing the check was a tech VC from Silicon Valley. And she gets up and the first thing she says is I don't invest in biotech or life science companies because they have a long runway and just need to raise a lot of money, and it's not my sweet spot. And I looked around and I was the only biotech company presenting that day. So initially my thoughts were, well, I have no chance. But at the same time, I was like, we worked really hard to get to this finals. And, there's 400 people in the room. Somebody's got to be able to open up a door. So I went up and presented as if I didn't hear what she just said. And to our surprise, at the end of that night, we ended up winning the $50,000 check, which was essentially a grant. There was no equity taken. But it was a huge, changing, I guess it changed the path for the company because it gave us credibility. It opened up a lot of doors, but also gave us the funding to start doing some of the basic animal studies that we needed to build a proof of concept. And to this day, I think that was what kind of changed what, or made what SiNON is today, because we got so much, non-financial, I guess, aspect. You could think about it like the support and the mentorship and just everyone kind of being there to see us go through. And, the same thing happened about a year later when we applied for NC Idea grant. And, a lot of these, I think the story behind it that I want people to take away is, even if people tell you not to apply or, don't waste your time, you're not going to get it. It's not about winning the grant. It's the whole process of applying and, I guess, perfecting your pitch and perfecting kind of the business plan. And you only get there by making these modifications, by getting other people's feedback and input. And, don't give up so easily. Like if I had listened to people the first time around, I wouldn't have applied to the startup challenge, or I wouldn't have applied for NC Idea. And that was, $100,000 we got in grant money that got us to where we needed to get to be able to do a friends and family round and to get to the next stage. But you never know what, life's going to throw at you, and you got to take a chance and work for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Why do you think what is it that you did that changed her mind, or why do you think she changed your mind? I mean, it's amazing story. And I'm sure there was a lot of challenges getting to that deck and getting to that pitch where there were people giving you feedback and maybe feeling like, oh man, this is really hard. But why do you think it changed her mind?
So I think there's a lot of factors. One is, there was a judging panel with, it's been so long now. It was either 6 to 8 judges, and they all came from very various industries. Like one of the judge was actually, Melissa from Melissa and Doug, the toy company. She was the founder, and she was a judge on there. And so it was, very unique, I guess, group of people that were judging. And, a lot of them were not from the biotech industry. And so when I was actually working on the deck, I purposely made it so that anybody could understand what we were working on. Like I didn't want it to be very technical. I knew that the audience was mostly going to be, a normal person that doesn't really have the scientific technical background. And I think that's important for all, founders to be able to convey the technology in a way that anyone can understand simply, but also at the same time still include some information that has the technical aspects without getting into too much of like the science technology, because at that point people just glance over and kind of stop paying attention. But the day before the startup challenge, the person who was organizing the entire event, I got an email from him, and this email was like pure criticism of like everything on the deck, from the content of the deck to the color of the slides to the name of the company. He was basically like, I don't like any of it. And I was like, I have 24 hours to turn this around. And I panicked. And I remember I forwarded that email to my strategy professor. And to this day, like, that strategy professor's a close mentor and friend. He was on his, like, he wasn't even working on campus that day. And he was, back then it was, Skype meetings. So he was like, let's get on a Skype call and go through slide by slide. He spent almost 2 hours on his day off to work through the deck with me. And I think that shows what kind of professors are at FIPLA, because again, like he had no obligation to do that. And he did it because he purely wanted to see the success of, the students at his school. And he believed in the technology, he believed in the company, and he believed in me. And I think he showed up. And I think without him, I probably wouldn't have gotten, and he came from a very non-technical background. So practicing the pitch multiple times with him made a huge difference, because from someone who was like very technical, I had to train myself how to give up or how to deliver a presentation without getting into like the details and without, bogging people down with facts that they probably wouldn't understand.
Maybe not even care about, right?
True. But I think that the connecting factor is we all have somebody who's been affected by cancer. And I think that that's kind of the hook. Like that's something that everybody understands. Whether you understand like what's actually going around in the background or not is a different story. But the fact that we've all seen a patient go through chemotherapy, see how significantly their life can be impacted is huge. And I think using that as we can all relate to it. And, we have, myself included, aging parents, aging grandparents, and Alzheimer's is on a rise and Parkinson's on a rise. Like we can see how these diseases need to have a cure, hopefully sooner rather than later. And it's just a matter of time before we get to that point where, we're going to be needing these medications. And I hope by that time there is a cure, or there is a way to deliver these medications in a safer way.
Yeah. Was there a moment that you felt like, oh, I am now a leader of a startup. Like this is now real. Like this is because, you're going through all these things and it's probably not, it's probably not a milestone you ever really think about, or maybe you did where it just hit you and said, oh my goodness, I'm a CEO.
I don't think it's still hit me quite yet. Like I think part of it is my personality type is very, I like to have a team that's, more inclusive. So I want to make sure that I don't make them feel like, hey, I'm your boss and you're the employee. Rather, I like to have that open dialogue of, hey, if you have a suggestion or if you have some way to do this better, like I want you to be able to share that with me. And to have that kind of relationship with the team kind of cultivates, the curiosity and them not being afraid to make suggestions, because I think the best ideas come from one, a diverse team, but secondly, a team that is willing, that has the same mission and is driven by the same factors. And I think, for all of us, we're all rooted in, hey, we want to come up with a cure. We want to come up with a safer delivery mechanism. And we just got to figure out how is kind of what keeps us together and what binds us. But at the same time, like, I don't want to be that person who's like, hey, I'm telling you to do X, Y, and Z, and this is the only way you can get it done, because it may not be the right way or it may not be the best way to do it. And I want people to be able to challenge me and tell me, like, have you thought about it in a different approach? And I think that's what is different about our team. We're small. We're only a team of 5, but it helps in terms of, keeping us all very transparent. And, we're open to sharing ideas. We're open to taking criticism and feedback, where I feel like if I didn't have this personality type or was more rigid, it'd be a lot harder for people on the team to do that. Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about some of these other diseases other than cancer, and it's interesting to me. You work on the drug delivery part of it, and so does that mean that you can team pretty much with any pharmaceutical, company or developer for their drug to get it to where it's needed in a precise way, in a safe way, in an effective, cost-effective way? That's what you do. That's what SiNON does, correct?
Correct. And so for us, we're pretty agnostic to indication. As I mentioned, we want to build a platform that can be used kind of throughout the board for any neurological disease. The reason we started with oncology was there's a very clear end goal, or there's a very clear quantifiable measurement of tumor shrinkage, versus in Alzheimer's, until recently, one, there wasn't really medications that we could test. But secondly, those are long-term studies that, use the analogy of a mouse. Like if I do the study on a mouse, it's not going to talk back to me a week later and be like, oh, I remember what I did. Versus in, a tumor model, like all you need to do is measure how did the tumor shrink, how much of the dose did we give, how much did we reduce the dose, and you have your endpoints. Whereas in some of the neurodegenerative diseases is a little bit harder to do some of this testing, especially because we were dependent on the medication that we partner with the different pharma companies. So our goal is, let's build a platform, let's show them the data. Then once we have the, everything in terms of like the proof of concept data, go back to the pharmaceutical companies and say, hey, do you have something in your pipeline that has a challenge crossing the blood-brain barrier in a high enough dosing to be effective? And secondly, there's a lot of these drugs that fail in phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. Even though they may be promising, they're just too toxic. And so if we can help reduce the dosing of the overall drug by having a targeted delivery mechanism, that could potentially enhance or increase their chances of getting through the FDA regulatory path.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And when we talked previously, I thought is like, if you can do it in a very precise way, you don't have to use as much of the drug. And so the side effects of that goes down. As we learn more about the blood-brain barrier and, what it does, what it doesn't do, how it fails, will SiNON's platform need to change? Or, where's that kind of research science in that understanding there?
So over the years, we've optimized the technology to come a long way in terms of, initially it was just using the plain carbon material to cross through the blood-brain barrier. Now we're looking at how can we specify where is it going within the brain and where is it releasing. In the case of a tumor model, we have a way to engineer it to tune kind of the release mechanism to be more prevalent in acidic environment, which tumor cells are versus the healthy cells. But at the same time, we're also looking at how can we attach different receptors or different peptides or different things that will bind to certain sites within the brain. And that will further enhance the capability to get a more targeted approach. And so I think, based on the feedback we get from the pharma companies or even our potential partners is, you tell us a target, you tell us what we need to basically attach. We'll do all of the engineering work. We'll do all the encapsulation work. But in terms of like the drug compound itself, how that works and how well it works is dependent on our partners. So it's kind of like a joint relationship where we bring in one part of the puzzle, they bring in the second part, but together we can potentially come up with a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mentioned that you're the 2023 Termeer Foundation Fellow. What does that mean for you? And, because that's a pretty prestigious, kind of grant that I think that they gave you. What does that mean for you?
So I think, the first thing is a huge honor to be part of the fellowship because of the name, but also because of Henry Termeer's legacy. And, started to help build a foundation for first-time biotech founders. And so you're with a group of people that are in the same boat. And we all understand the struggles of startup life, of fundraising, of, building a team, how to retain a team, the core science behind it. But startup life in general is a very lonely road where people think it's very glamorous, and it's definitely not. There's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of ups and downs. And having that support system that you can rely on because they understand the same challenges you're going through is huge. And I think that's the most important part I get from the fellowship of the peers. And, we have a WhatsApp group, and people will share recommendations for IP lawyers or for, accountants, or just like which CRO to talk to. And it's just one of those things that there's people at all different stages. Like there's some that have just started out versus others that have raised, $30 to $75 million. Like it's a huge variety of different backgrounds, different types of technologies, and also different stages. And so I think learning from the peers that have been there and done that has been huge. And I think also the second aspect is the mentorship, because they have a group of advisors that all come from like the biotech industry, and they're there to help you succeed and to help you find connections and help you find, potential investors, or just kind of open up doors in terms of like if you need advice or feedback. And a lot of times, like, without the fellowship, like, I wouldn't know where to go or where to start. But it's a great starting point of, hey, this is what I need help in. Do you have someone within your network that can potentially help, talk through some of these challenges and come up with a solution?
Yeah, it's a big chasm between the research side and the commercialization of the technology or the research, and just even the language. They're just different tribes, right? They're different tribes with different languages, different networks, and sometimes how do you even get invited to the table for a discussion is tough. Yeah. So you mentioned the challenges of the startup. What are your, like, today, in the next 3 months, 6 months, what are your biggest challenges, your top three that you're working on and spending most of your time on?
So I think the biggest one right now is fundraising. And, the economy is kind of stacked up against us right now because it's not a great time to be fundraising. But the reality is, to keep our doors open or to keep the lights on, like, we need to be able to fundraise to get to that next stage. And it's the chicken and the egg problem, where whether you go to the investors or you go to the pharma partners, they're like, well, we want the efficacy data. And I'm like, the reason I'm raising the money is so that we can get that data. And it's challenging to kind of get across, like, how do we get to that next milestone without having the money or without having that partner? And it's, in the biotech industry, it's like essentially that valley of death, where you have this gap where you have the proof of concept, but to get to that next milestone, you need a little bit more, capital. And without getting it, you can't get to the next milestone. But given that the industry itself is not doing so great in terms of like the fundraising climate, has been our biggest challenge. And so we've had to kind of scale back on some of our trials. But I think, the data that we've been getting back has been very positive. So we've been using that to get traction and to kind of move to the next stage and hopefully raise enough money to get to the next milestones we have planned.
Why is it so tough to raise money right now? What is creating the difficulty in the fundraising in that venture environment?
So it's multiple things. One is the economy. Interest rates are high, and so investors are looking for a certain return on their investments. Secondly, the biotech industry is very volatile. Like, there's been a lot of people losing their jobs, a lot of, even with large pharma, they've been scaling back, especially on R&D efforts. So even getting those partnerships has become more challenging. And then I think the other aspect is kind of just the stage that we're at. Like, we are early, but we're not so early that we don't have any data. We have enough data, but we're not. I think most of the sweet spot for a lot of the investment groups are Series A, and we're looking at a seed round of 3.5 million. So I think that doesn't hit the benchmark. So that's kind of where we've been struggling.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me that we talk about improving healthcare for all and just, bringing the bar up higher, but yet to do that, so many researchers, innovators, entrepreneurs like yourself struggle to be able to bring to market, if you would, these things that will increase, the care, healthcare for all of us.
And I think the other part is, when you're looking at some of these companies that are getting the start or like the follow-on funding, is they already have a group of angels or VCs that have invested in the first round. And so they know that there's like this downtime of the economy is not doing great. So let's, reinvest or put in some more capital into these companies to keep them afloat because we've already invested in them, versus, we came from a background where it was friends and family money. So it wasn't that we had large institutional investors that could be like, oh, let's pump in some more money to get them, going through the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah. Wow, it's scary, and I'm sure you're working through with your mentors some plan A's and plan
Yes.
B's and
Plan
probably
C's.
C's and D's and the whole thing there. So funding is your top need for SiNON right now.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. How many people do you have? Do you have full time? Do you have part time? What does the organization look like?
So we have 5 full time. During COVID, we actually moved half of our operation to India. So about 3 of them are based in India, which helps us keep our runway going a little bit longer. Salaries or cost of living's lower, so we can afford to do that. We also partnered with a global CRO that had a branch in India called Eurofins. It's a European brand, but basically that helped us bring down the cost of our animal studies by a third. And so that's kind of how we've gotten a little creative to extend the runway and get more out of the funding that we've raised. And then we have 2 based in North Carolina.
Okay. Yeah. So you're responsible for all their livelihoods
Yes.
too. Yeah. So
And so things like cutting our own salaries has been, the first thing.
yep, I understand that. I've had to do that in the past too. So, but on a more positive note, if you can get past the fundraising, and that's part of the reason for telling your story today, is hopefully maybe somebody's listening and would like to contact you on that. But what is your hope for the future? I mean, you're a very hopeful, positive person. What is your hope for the future?
Well, I think the hope is, we can start some partnerships with pharma companies to build their platforms and to get their drugs to the pipeline because, we're not specialized in the therapeutic space. Our area of expertise is the delivery aspect. And so we rely on, there's so many great technologies that have been shelved because of the challenges of getting across the blood-brain barrier or just making it safe enough to use. And they potentially may be the missing piece or, maybe the cure for diseases like Alzheimer's or brain tumors. And we're hopeful that, through partnerships, we can find some of these collaborators and get to the next stage.
Yeah, I was just thinking, and I'm hopeful for that too, because I was just thinking about those researchers, those entrepreneurs that are really focused on the drug side of this. They may actually be more successful if they had, the delivery system that allowed for them to be successful. Because it sounds like in some cases, your delivery system can even be kind of a booster to get through the blood-brain barrier to make the drug successful.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, is there anything that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't ask you because you want to get that message out?
Well, I guess a final remark or something that I'd like to leave the listeners with is never give up. Like, this is a long journey. It's definitely not the easy way out. And, for those of the listeners that are, potentially looking into entrepreneurship or, trying to figure it out, there is no manual. And a lot of it's like, we make mistakes, we learn from them. And that's why we have mentors and advisors that help us navigate some of these challenges, but have a strong support system because the days that are really hard, you need somebody to be there for you and someone who's going to just be like, it's going to be okay. And, kind of motivate you not to give up because we've come so far and it would be a shame to see, all of this go away just because we don't have the funding to get to the next stage. But I think, having that support system gives you the confidence, but also gives you the reassurance that there are better days that are coming.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very positive place to land on this, and I'm sure you have that patience. You've been at this for a long time, and you have this deep seated need to solve the problem, not just let's create the business to make money. It's let's really let's let's solve these problems for these patients that you saw so long ago when you were, thinking about med school.
Thank you. And it was wonderful kind of having this chat and sharing some of the experiences. And
Yeah, you've had a fascinating journey. So Afreen, how would people get a hold of you if they're listening and they're excited about what you're doing and want to find out more?
yeah, we have a LinkedIn page for the company, but also I'm on LinkedIn, Afreen Allam, ALLAM, or my email's ALLAM at SiNON, SINON, and then TX.com.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with each other and soon. And I will definitely be tapping my network and letting them know that you exist and what you're doing. So I hope others will do that too.
I appreciate that. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for joining Research Renaissance. For more information and to stay updated, subscribe for more episodes and visit our website at tofflertrust.org. Feel free to call us if you have any thoughts, suggestions, or just want to find out more about the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Until we meet again, onward and upward.